I literally say it was like plucking words out of my flesh. You don't know what you can create sometimes until you actually unravel the thread. That women were deserving of absolute love, no matter how many flaws and failings they had.
Hello, welcome to Real and Real Characters. We've been seeing since last week the effect of the real on the real, which is to say, we saw what goes on in the mind of a filmmaker when he creates a movie and what could have affected him in his real life, which he puts into that movie. In this context, we met Densham, and as promised, he's on again this week. And he's going to take us through the journey of what went on in his mind, in his life, when he was creating the movies Robin Hood and the Prince of Thieves and Moll, Flanders. But before we go on, here's a little more about Penn.
In 1990, Densham re-envisioned the Robin Hood story and wrote Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves and produced the film for Morgan Creek Productions and Warner Brothers. The film became one of Warner Brothers' largest grossing movies ever, spinning off games, toy lines, and the #1 music single from Bryan Adams, Everything I Do It For You. In the same year, they were producers on Backdraft, with Ron Howard directing for Image Entertainment and Universal Pictures. Backdraft generated one of the longest-lasting attractions at the Universal Studios tour. Inspired by the loss of his mother, Densham wrote and directed a personal version of Moll, Flanders for MGM and Spelling Entertainment, based loosely on the novel by Daniel Defoe, starring Morgan Freeman and Robin Wright. Densham also wrote and directed Houdini, an $8 million TNT feature for television starring Jonathan Schaech, Mark Ruffalo, and Emile Hirsch. In television, Densham wrote and supervised the re-franchising of The Outer Limits science fiction anthology series, which he executive produced with his partners for its award-winning 7-year run on American television. In the process, Densham earned the unique distinction of being named number 8 in the 50 most powerful people in the science fiction list compiled by Cine Fantastic magazine. In 2003, he reintroduced the Twilight Zone fantasy anthology series to American audiences on UPN.
Just for a reminder, here is a small clipping from where we left off last week with Penn.
This was a world that my son was going to grow up in, and maybe we needed more altruistic heroes. And was it possible to make a film that would speak like to that value?
So how did Penn manage to arrive at and convey the idea of altruism in his movie? Watch on.
This inspiration came to me that maybe I could use the Robin Hood model, which is a story, the folk story that I grew up on as a kid, and I'd seen the Errol Flynn Robin Hood, and it was boundless joy to me. The heroism that Errol Flynn exhibited, his feet almost never touched the ground. He was so full of joy and energy and so heroic. I decided two things. One is I would try and structure a Robin Hood story that put a very rich, spoiled brat of a human being, an arrogant ass, whose son had begged him, who was a baron, had begged him not to go to the Crusades because it was wrong to try and force another man to your religion, and had him go anyway. And when he was away, the Sheriff of Nottingham, the villain, the archetypal villain, kills his father. And so when Robin Hood comes back to England, he's very angry and he wants to get revenge, and he uses the woodsmen, the peasants, to be architects for his revenge and brings even worse elements on them. And I also had this idea, which was, what if I could put an Arab, a Muslim, side by side with Robin Hood in this story as a man of honor, as a man of information and knowledge, and a man of great dignity who was also heroic. And it's all theoretical at that point because I hadn't written it. This was this mental process. And the idea of putting two enemies together from two different religions that learn from each other instead of war from each other seemed to me a valuable thing. And I went and pitched my idea to 3 different studios. Disney was one of them, TriStar was another. And they all said, that's the stupidest idea. No one wants to see guys with swords. They want to see guys with guns. We're not interested. And I pitched the idea to my partner, and he also had a reluctance because he was sure you couldn't put an Arab in Robin Hood and make it make any sense. I was feeling very down about the project, and my company's assistant, the guy who helped type things for us, said, you know, I think it's a great idea. I'd love to help you. If there's any way I can do something, I would love to be a supporter. And it was that person's interest that helped me to start writing, and I wouldn't have written it without that. And so what it taught me was that sometimes just the breath of someone else breathing on your embers can help you to get to a place where you take on a challenge. You don't know what you can create sometimes until you actually unravel the thread. And as I wrote every day for 3 weeks, I would hand the pages over, and then my partner started reading the pages, and he could see on the pages how an Arab could be in Robin Hood, but he couldn't imagine it himself. What I learned was, again, sometimes we as creators also have to help other people use our own creativity to bring them to the things that are new so that they can understand them and see them in the ways that they value. And my partner became the biggest ally of the project. We were with a script that was 3/4 finished, and we heard there was another Robin Hood, and it was going to get made, and John McTiernan and the guy who'd done Die Hard was going to direct it for Fox. And my partner wanted to give up, and he said, no, that's a waste of time. We're not going to get there. And I couldn't give up. The things that were in that were so meaningful to me. And there was a birth scene that I'd written in. When I was writing in that 3-week period, it was very rough. And I say, when you write creatively, it's a journey of exploration. You're going into the jungle. You're cutting a path. You don't know what you're going to discover. And one day I was just crying. And I was writing a birth scene into Robin Hood, going, you don't know how to write birth scenes into male adventure movies? Come on, what is this? And I said, no, write it. Because I've learned to go with my ideas rather than reject them. And I say write dangerously. And I realized that what I was doing was I was putting a child on the screen where the Muslim, with his knowledge, helped a cesarean birth for the leader of the peasants, wife to give birth. And it modeled our own cesarean that my wife had gone through, an emergency cesarean to get my son born. But also what I was doing was I was physicalizing on the screen the child that was the future for the peasants, that Robin Hood was willing to sacrifice his life to give so that they could have a future. And that scene was vital to me. And that was the first scene the director didn't want to shoot because it didn't mean anything to him. And I realized that, you know, again, I begged Kevin Costner, who was the star of Robin Hood, to put his pressure on because he'd had kids. And so the scene was only shot because Kevin pushed to get it shot. It's what I call a life script. And a life script is where something comes to you and you must write it. I say sometimes the stories tell you. I've noticed that when I surrender to my life scripts, and I've only written 4 or 5 that absolutely had to be written, they get made more frequently. They also contain things which are much more humanistic.
They're not interested in the truth.
But he's lying.
You're too weak, Peter. You would not live through it.
As you wish. Cut the other one's hand off as well.
I'm sorry, Robin. Oh, God.
People who know Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves will think of it as an adventure with lots of fun and daring do.
Now, sir, if you'd be so kind as to give me your name.
But underneath what I'm really, it's a story about humanity and values. And those are the things I wanted to preserve.
I'm curious as to what manner of creature is so fearsome that it takes 6 men to attack it.
This boy killed one of the sheriff of Nottingham's deer.
You starved us. We needed the meat.
That little bastard was poaching deer.
Poaching? Is it not a greater crime to starve a family?
How did you connect the transformation of Robin Hood and the birth of a child? Was there a connection? And how did the character transform from being a very badass kind of a guy to somebody who wants to, save the future of the of peasants and other people?
We talked about Joseph Campbell, who was the philosopher teacher, professor who studied history and legends and myths around the world. And he wrote a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, where he essentially said all characters in all of the great legends and myths and religious parables go through the same steps. And my Robin Hood character uses his anger in the first half of the movie to try and get revenge against the sheriff.
Locksley?
The king shall hear of this!
Join us.
Never.
Join us. Or die. I will not rest until my father's avenged.
And then when he brings disaster on the peasants and their families, he realizes and is humbled by their loss.
My God.
We're gonna go, Robin! We're gonna go now!
And then is challenged to make a purpose out of what he's done. And then changes from being a selfish, arrogant person to somebody who feels that in order to fulfill himself, he must be willing to die by taking on the challenge to save those who he had brought this terrible fate on.
Locksley.
His partners, the Arab, who was called Azim, played by Morgan Freeman, become allies in that process, and then they risk their lives so they can go forward. The birth really is a metaphor for new life, and I find when I surrender to writing that I frequently have birth scenes in my movies. I did a movie called Moll, Flanders, which was the story of a 17th century woman who was extremely poor, and her mother got pregnant in a prison because they wouldn't hang you if you were pregnant in England at that time. So women would give themselves to the guards, and then when you gave birth, they would hang you. And I used that as a beginning of a child's life, and so followed that child. She has her own child after her husband's died. And I filmed a scene with Robin Wright, who was my Moll Flanders, and her husband was an artist, where she put all the paintings that her husband had painted around her as she gave birth, so her child would be surrounded by her husband's creativity. And again, that moves me immensely. I have no idea why I have those ideas, but I'll fight tooth and nail to get that movie made, because the things in it are magical to me. There's these things that touch my heart that won't allow me to quit on them. When I was filming Moll Flanders, and again we had Morgan Freeman, I was very privileged to have Morgan and Robin Wright. My partner John said, it was on the set, and he said, "How come none of your characters have mothers?" And I go, oh, wow. Because when I surrender, Robin had no mother. Moll Flanders is a woman whose mother is hung the day she's born, and she loses her own child, and then the story is, will she be reunited with it? I have another movie where a Native American Navajo policewoman, her mother died because she chose not to have an operation for cancer, which is very common on the Navajo Nation from the uranium mining, which has gone on, rather than kill her unborn child. So the daughter grows up without a mother and feels that she has to have a purpose in her life. So these things come out of me. These things motivate you to fight for what you believe as an artist. When you write from that magical place, and you've had kids, we have a greater purpose, as well as to make a living, to make a difference.
You had lost your mother when you were very young. Do you think that has translated on the characters, the way they looked at life?
I think very much. And what I noticed is that when I write against my nature, when I wrote a horror movie that was because we needed money, I literally say it was like plucking words out of my flesh. It was like so much not my natural instincts. But when I'm writing something, and sometimes these things flow, the Moll Flanders was the strangest, most beautiful writing experience I've ever had. something set me off. I physically had a gut instinct. It was like there's a sausage in my gut that's a story, and I know it's a historical figure, a woman, and I know it's a really important story in my life, but I don't know what it is. And I knew it was going to be come out of me somehow, but I didn't know when or where. But you see, the thing is, I don't think creativity is logical. I think it's subconscious, and I think sometimes we're processing things and we get clues or we get insights. And I've written whole movies because I got an ending. And in the case of Moll Flanders, what happened was I was driving, hearing a documentary radio show on an orphans and foundlings home in England that had been turned into a museum. And they talked about letters that had been left with babies that had been abandoned on the doorstep 100 years earlier. And I thought, what does a woman write to a child she'll never see again? And I found myself a few hours later writing the end of a movie, which was, what say you, child, now that you've heard your mother's story? And I assumed that she'd been read the letter. And the child says, you could throw me out without a crust to eat before I deny that woman is worthy of my love. And the woman who is questioning her says, well, then prepare yourself, child, for I am that woman, I am your mother. And it broke me up. What I knew was I wanted to tell a story from the mother's where she shared every unvarnished truth and failing that had happened to her or she had failed to do with the child by reading the letter to her before she revealed who she was. And she had abandoned her child, been forced to abandon her child to an orphanage, and didn't want to trick the child into loving her, didn't want a false love. She wanted the child to only love her if she truly had earned it. And that was the purpose of that story. But it was also, because I had the privilege of having a daughter with my wife, that story also was an opportunity to say that women were deserving of absolute love, no matter how many flaws and failings they had. And that also was a message I wanted in that movie.
Penn talks about the creative process, how he needed somebody to encourage him and endorse his idea. In his case, his assistant, who gave him the go-ahead and told him that his idea was good. Because without that, maybe we would not have even seen Robin Hood and the Prince of Thieves on screen. We all need that, don't you think? Somebody to encourage and endorse what we are thinking, just so that we can take it further on with a little more enthusiasm. But how many of us give that encouragement and enthusiasm to others, especially our children? How many times have we told our children that their ideas are quite silly and that they should keep it aside and, do the more practical stuff like study or something? Maybe we should think about it, about encouraging children to explore their ideas, however silly we might think they are. You never know what heights they can reach. But sometimes when there is nobody to encourage you, to endorse you, to tell you that what you're thinking is worthwhile, then you only have to believe in that deep conviction in your gut that this is the way to go. And that's what Penn has also done with his movie Robin Hood. When nobody else was convinced that it was good enough, he went ahead because he had something he really, really wanted to say and he believed in it. So I think we have to also learn that at some point of time, we need to believe in ourselves. I love the way Penn said that all women are deserving of love despite all their flaws. But what made me really do a double take was the idea that a mother should be deserving of her child's love. This is something all mothers, and me being a mother, we have taken for granted, that a child will love us just because we are their mother, or that the mother will love the child. But this idea that we have to be deserving of that love, worthy of that love, isn't that something to think about? Mothers who are watching this, please do give me your feedback about this. Next week, Penn has other very different ideas to share. He's going to talk to us about other movies which have inspired him. And if you haven't heard of mirror neurons yet, wait for it. He's going to tell us about them next week. So I look forward to seeing you again in the next episode and last episode with Penn Densham. This week's movie quiz is here. An aristocrat takes a warrant of custody towards a young girl who is being physically mistreated at an orphanage by abusive nuns. Afterwards, he begins to tell her the story about her mother. Which movie carries this story? What is the name of this aristocrat and who plays the role? Does the young girl meet her mother?
You can send your answers to the WhatsApp or email given here.
The answers to the previous movie quiz are: what is different about this character who owes the hero his life? Answer: he is a Muslim, a Moor, not seen in the original story of Robin Hood. The villain in the movie: which other character is he also famous for playing? Answer: Severus Snape in the Harry Potter series. What was the award that the main protagonist received for this movie? Answer: he won the Golden Raspberry Award for Worst Actor.
If you like this program, please click the like button, share, comment, and subscribe to the show.